So GDPR is the General Data Protection Regulation, and it's a set of rules that harmonises the data privacy laws across the EU member states. And it serves to provide a common set of rules for audit, for compliance, and ultimately for breach and sanction. The idea being that a lot more control of EU citizen data is left in the hands of the EU citizens, and that means for a business now there's much more onus on them in terms of the way that they store and process that data and make that data available to the citizens when requested, and really all of the systems and processes around the protection of that data. Now, although the GDPR rules are for EU member nations, it impacts any business irrespective of their location as long as they are processing EU citizen data. So it's a wide-ranging set of regulations. They were adopted in April 2016 and they come into effect at the end of May 2018. So time is quite tight now for when companies need to be in compliance with these regulations. So GDPR brings significant challenges to companies just because the onus on the business now is increased above and beyond the data privacy protections that they're likely to have in place today. We conducted our own recent independent research on the subject, and we found that 25% of companies with 1,000 or more employees were actually not aware of the need to comply with GDPR, or even the rules and regulations that surrounded GDPR. On top of that, we found that a third of companies that had 3,000 or more employees, although they were aware of GDPR, they actually had no plan today or path to compliance with GDPR. Now, bearing in mind that GDPR comes into effect in May of next year, timescales become really tight. GDPR brings much more onus on the business in terms of the breadth of the data that they need to protect, how they need to protect it. Organisations need to demonstrate that they have compliance built into their systems and processes by design and by default. On top of that, there will be supervisory authorities that can audit and have the legal right to audit companies for compliance and leverage a range of fines that would rise all the way up to 4% of global turnover, or up to 20 million euros in the event of a data breach. So the three tips that I have for business today, probably in reverse order of priority, but in a natural order of assimilation, is firstly, organisations need to be very clear about the data that they are collecting of their EU citizen base. So they need to make sure that only that data that is relevant to their business is being collected. Everything else should be dropped. Secondly, once they've identified that data set, it's very important to make sure that the storage systems and the processes around that provide for the implications of GDPR, which is that EU citizens request their data in a portable format at any time. They can request that they are forgotten from the system, i.e. all data is deleted. So that you need to make sure that those processes are in place. But the most important tip that I can provide today is, if we think about the working environment nowadays, there's way more mobility for employees, there's BYOD, remote working, work from home. Companies need to make sure that their data, both within the organisation and without the organisation, is encrypted at all times. That is because if there was a breach of data and personal identifiable information of EU citizens was found to be out in the wild, so to speak, if the organisation was deemed to have taken a responsible view of that data and encrypted it such that if it had been picked up by somebody outside of the organisation, the data was inaccessible, then the supervisory authorities that audit the compliance and apply the fines in terms of breach would take a much more sensitive view of the situation and maybe reduce the fines because the data was not compromised in any way.